Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 56, and we are starting Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. This is book 3 of the Stormlight Archive. We ended book 2 of the Stormlight Archive, Words of Radiance, a little bit ago. We stopped for Warbreaker. We stopped for Edge Dancer in between the two books. But we're back fully into Roshar. No novellas, no side stories on different planets. We're into book 3 of the Stormlight Archive. Oathbringer is my personal favorite of the 4 books, so I hope it lives up to y'all's expectations. I know you guys have high expectations of the series by now. So I will throw it to Paul, first of all, to ask how you're doing and get maybe some predictions, some hopes of Oathbringer.
Well, I love predictions, and they're always extremely accurate. So I'm here for that. So I'm really, really excited to get into Oathbringer. I feel like whenever you told me about this series years ago, I wanted to get to this point, but I didn't know how I was going to get here, and so it only took a year. So pretty good. But yeah, I'm super excited and already getting started. I'm really into it and excited to talk to you guys about it. I have no groundbreaking predictions right now.
Okay, Elliot?
I agree with you, Paul. I feel like we're not necessarily veterans at this point, but we're fully established. I feel like as readers and fans in the Stormlight Archive world. And so this is fun to really dive into the meat of it now. We've got some history, we've got some knowledge, we know enough to be dangerous. So I'm excited to dive into the world even further in Oathbringer.
Wonderful. As I've said, that Oathbringer is my favorite of the 4 books published so far. When we started this podcast, Oathbringer was the last Stormlight book to be published, but since we've started it, Rhythm of War has come out, and I've read Rhythm of War once. I read it straight through within 3 days, and I'm not going to read it again before the 3 of us go through it, probably in about 6 months or so. So when we get to Rhythm of War, I'll actually be fairly fresh on it as well. I've read Oathbringer quite a bit. It's my favorite of the 3 that were published up until that point. So I'm fairly well versed in Oathbringer, but when we get to Rhythm of War, it's only gonna be my second read. So
Exciting stuff.
No joke.
Alrighty. We can go ahead and jump into the prologue of... Oh wait, I'm getting ahead of myself.
I was gonna say, my words.
Yeah.
I wrote these for nothing.
The words,
Elliot.
Kaladin, the words.
Yeah, my bad. Elliot, what are your 2 words to summarize the prologue, chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Oathbringer?
So my 2 words are opposites, and they are darkness and light.
Darkness and light. Alrighty. I feel like we've had those 2 words before, but that's totally fine. Themes of fantasy books, it's fine. Paul, how about your 2 words?
So my 1 word, Trevor, is dimensions, and I think it goes pretty good with this, so I just stuck with 1.
Okay. I'm really curious to get into that. We can use these 3 words and start our discussion on Oathbringer.
We sure can.
All right, Paul. I am really curious what dimensions means for these 3 chapters. And keep in mind that just before you say whatever you say, anybody who's listening, keep in mind that Paul's a first-time reader. Uh, go ahead, Paul, with dimensions. What does that mean for you for these chapters?
Well, Trevor, wouldn't you like to know? I would love to pull that on you for the amount of times that I ask questions and don't get to know the answer, right? We don't always get to know, Trevor. No, I'm kidding. So I chose dimensions for a couple reasons that I felt like it kind of had a double meaning. I'm scared I may not have gone deep enough because it was kind of a surface level thing that popped up to me in my mind. I would say the thing that stuck out to me the most that made me think of the word was Dalinar's visions, and specifically with the like 9 shadows and the Unmade and all of that. I really the reason I chose dimensions specifically is I felt like this opening and potentially what Oathbringer may do is just add another dimension to what we've already seen and what we're already doing in Stormlight. By the end of Words of Radiance, I feel like we're starting to get a grip on things. I know we have endless questions that we want answered, but we understand the systems and all this stuff. And I feel like we're gonna get stuff thrown at us that's just kind of on another plane. We're going from 3-dimensional to 4-dimensional or something. That made me think of it is are these like some anti-spren or like the opposite of heralds or like what's going on here. Also just things like with the prologue, it's from Eshonai's perspective, and there was just a lot of, I guess, alluding to the Parshendi just like knowing things that we don't, I guess, about this. And
Parshendi, no Dalinar? Sorry.
Parshendi, no Dalinar now. But yeah, the Parshendi just kind of know all this stuff, and there's just got to be like another level that of importance or understanding that they have that we don't know yet, that I assume we will find out at some point in this book or the next. I would say those are the two major reasons why. So,
all right, Elliot.
Mine are probably pretty obvious, I think, for these chapters, but I keyed in on some specific elements that seem to be playing into sort of perhaps a theme of darkness and light, and the two very much kind of alongside each other, which was interesting. In the prologue, we have a little more on the dark sphere that we've been hunting for more and more information about. We see a little bit of that, and I want to talk more about that when we get to it. But that darkness. Then when we see Odium and his champion, there's this very interesting darkness and light going on there. There's the darkness of what I think is the champion and the shadows and the unmade, but then there's this blinding light that accompanies the shadow, and what that could possibly be telling us, I have no idea yet, but it seems very, very intriguing. So that's why I keyed into darkness and light.
Cool. All right. Now we can jump into the prologue of Oathbringer here, and we can pick up kind of where you guys were leading with where your dark sphere here, because we get that fairly quickly in this the prologue. We have an Eshonai point of view chapter. Paul, I've dangled this in front of you for a little while now, and you finally discovered who the point of view chapter was for the prologue of Oathbringer. Would you have guessed that it would have been Eshonai, or what?
I know I went around on my guesses on this for a while because you did dangle it in front of me of like, oh, you'd never guess. Like, you would never guess who it is. And so I thought about it for a while. I guess I did not expect it to be Eshonai, but whenever it started and it was, I wasn't shocked. I wasn't surprised, but I was really curious to see like what would happen, because we have seen Eshonai stuff before. So,
yeah. What are your guys' thoughts on her first couple pages are just her absorbing Kholinar and the palace and and she's been thrown headfirst into this new culture of the Alethi, and she's trying to process everything that's happening. Before she really talks to Gavilar later in this chapter, what were your guys' impressions of Eshonai? Because up until this point, and maybe up until, maybe the last couple chapters, and maybe a couple interludes in Words of Radiance, the Parshendi have been portrayed as bad guys for us, and we have a point of view chapter from Eshonai here, and she just seems like a normal person, or parshman, or however you want to call them at this point.
Yeah, it kind of, so the way I would equate it to a real world thing, which I don't think is accurate or a good way to approach this, but just kind of the way that I rationalized it. This probably isn't accurate, but I almost felt like Eshonai was a young professional, like on her first job almost. That's kind of the like idea I got, was she was at this town and she was just like, okay, like what's going on, and like trying to figure things out. It was kind of funny. She was like, oh, these people have all their forms at once, and stuff. Like she was just used to the Parshendi, life. But it sounded like she was a very important part of their group that was going, and stuff. But it was interesting. But as far as her perspective, I almost felt like she was qualified, but not like experienced in what she was supposed to do. I was a little confused, but I didn't think too much about it, I guess.
That's actually a really good point. And actually, now that I think about it, some really good writing by Mr. Sanderson. This is a different Eshonai than what we've seen before. And that makes sense, the war on the Shattered Plains has drastically changed all of our characters. Why would it not have changed Eshonai? And clearly it has, because you're right, Paul. I agree with you that this is a more naive Eshonai than we've seen on the Shattered Plains. She is just kind of, wide-eyed and looking at the world, and that's not the Eshonai we're used to.
I agree with you on that.
I gotta say too, in this early section, Trevor, it actually made me a little bit sad, honestly, because clearly the Parshendi and the humans, or the Alethi, I should say, I suppose, actually seem like they got off to a really great start.
Right.
It seems like they were getting along really well in these first, I'm kind of assuming, weeks or months that like led up to, this moment. And so for what could have been this great alliance or partnership to be so intentionally destroyed is huge and sad.
And the Parshendi knew exactly what they were doing when they flip it on Gavilar, because they were that afraid of whatever Gavilar was about to do, and they knew exactly what the Alethi were capable of, because they'd gotten to know the Alethi, they'd gotten to know Gavilar. Gavilar at this point, as we'll read about, and we kind of know already, that he had just gone on this years-long campaign of fighting every High Prince until they joined him, and then they're on the Shattered Plains looking for gem hearts, and they stumble across the Parshendi. So they've been sharing and dialoguing culture back and forth, so they are well aware of how prepared for war the Alethi are at the moment, and so for them to be willing to do this, to assassinate Gavilar, whatever Gavilar was about to do, and we get a couple definitions, but we don't really know. We get a couple out of context phrases of what Gavilar was about to do, but we don't really know what that means yet. And so I'll let you guys kind of fish around for that here in a second. But they were that afraid of Gavilar that they were willing to just kill him on the spot, no matter what it meant to, in the future, as we've seen the last 2 books for them.
Definitely. I do. Before we move on too much from the prologue, there's something that I want to share about what my thoughts were reading this for the first time, and I'm not expecting anyone else had these thoughts, but I would believe it. I feel like it was phrased in a way that this could be believable. So whenever Eshonai first starts talking to Gavilar, first off, it was kind of cool to see like a conversation with Gavilar. Here is pretty neat, and going into it, it definitely felt like there was a big level of trust between Gavilar and Eshonai, and he kind of comes at her with like, "Oh, I need your help. Like you're the one who can help me do this," and maybe it was the internal like optimist in me. I thought Gavilar, the reveal was going to be Gavilar is still alive. I thought it was coming in, and then he was plotting with Eshonai to like cover this up somehow, and he was going to be alive. But then I found out shortly after that was not going to be the case. But it did get me really excited for a little while, and my mind was just racing. Like, okay, what does this mean for our story? But yeah, I'm actually curious to see. I don't know if anyone else who's watching or anyone out there had similar thoughts. I'm kind of curious if anyone did. But that was my initial wild prediction of this book, of reading it, but it was quickly disproven. It doesn't hold up like Shalon and Light Song. that one holds up, but this one
theory.
Solved.
Yeah, this one didn't hold up, I'm afraid. So close.
All right, so let's talk about Gavilar for a second here, because we get a lot more on what Gavilar was doing, what he was trying to do. We get quite a few like term of phrase drops, and they're not really defined, but we certainly know that Eshonai is afraid. So Gavilar tells her that he reveals to her the dark sphere, which we'll talk about here in a second. He tells her that I can return your gods, and you Parshmen need, or you Parshendi need to awaken. And he talks about gems holding spren, holding gods. What are your guys's like? Eliot, I'm curious to see what you picked up here, because there's a lot, and what do you got for me?
I'm sure there's way more in here that I picked up on, because you're right. Gavilar speaks like he knows a lot more than we're kind of used to our other characters knowing, which caught me off guard. Like he's talking about things that we've only just learned at like the end of Words of Radiance, things about the Parshendi's gods and just the Parshendi themselves. It seems like, Dalinar and Elokar, it's them out on the Shattered Plains, felt like they knew hardly anything about the Parshendi. And then here's Gavilar, who seems to know exactly who they are, exactly what he's about to do to try and bring their gods back. Like, whoa, he knows a lot more than our other characters knew at the time. Although I did key in on that Amaram is in this scene.
He is.
And I didn't catch it till the second read, actually, because he uses his first name, not Amaram, his surname or last name, whatever. But so this is kind of leaving me questioning, how much does Amaram know? And we've gotten hints before that Amaram knows a lot more than he's letting on.
Right.
And this is, I think, more evidence that points to Amaram knows way more than he's saying or letting other people think he knows alongside our other characters. But you mentioned the spren and the gems. I noted that very specifically. Gavilar talks about somehow used an ancient spren to imprison the original Parshmen in the bodies that they have now. Like, how did that work? what in the world? We know that Spren are involved in the form transformations for Parshendi. We know that the Parshendi had to collect like special Spren to achieve storm form. So perhaps this was some kind of Spren that somehow locked all of these. We're assuming Parshendi before into the dull form of Parshman, but that was done intentionally by the Alethi or by the humans. Interesting. Like, there's a lot of hints there.
Would you like a little reach of a theory
I would.
on that?
Please.
So the only reason that this came to my mind is because it's also presented here as new information, so it could correlate, I guess. So you said it was like a type of spren or something that did this, like made the Parshendi into a Parshman. It could be one of our like 9 shadows, or like correlated to that. It sounds like it's maybe some kind of evil or corrupt, or I don't know, spren that could be used for harm in a way. So I'm wondering if maybe that could somehow be correlated to these shadows, or like a power of one of them, a trait of one of them, or something like that.
So let's talk about the dark sphere, because I think the dark sphere may be tied to those shadows somehow. This is the first time, maybe not the first time, but this is a good element point in the story where we're getting some characters, these unmade creatures coming in. Maybe they're Spren, maybe they're not, that are an embodiment of darkness. We also have this sphere which kind of emits this light that's actually darkness. And I noticed in this section, Eshonai knows what it is. She sees it and she recognizes it and knows what it is, but she doesn't share enough of her thoughts for like to tell us what it is, which was frustrating, Brandon. But
Brandon.
right? But this, it tells me something, and it makes me wonder. It makes me wonder if maybe that power is somehow tied to their gods, or which could perhaps be tied to the unmade, these shadow beings. I don't know. Am I tacking the right thing onto your prediction, Paul? What do you think?
I could definitely see. I feel like there's kind of from what we can tell from the beginning of this book, I feel like it's just showing that there's a lot more evil than we know.
Yes.
That's one thing I even said in the first book. It's like it doesn't seem like there's a clear ultimate evil. We had a whole lot of discussion about that, but um, but now I feel like it's starting to hint more at, oh, there's something much bigger, maybe more people involved in evil than we thought, like a more sinister kind. So I would definitely believe that this dark sphere is correlated to this, and maybe we'll find out at the end of this book, is my guess. Maybe, or maybe
Probably.
next book, or maybe it hasn't been written yet. Maybe it's in the last one. So, but I would definitely, like, if I had to come up with something now, definitely they're correlated, and it's gotta be.
Just
Maybe.
quick question for you guys, just so I can get a nice clip for future reference. How many unmade do you think we've seen on screen so far?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yes.
Just to make sure I remember what it says about the unmade. So, does it talk about the unmade being people or spren, or does it give a specific there?
Does not.
It doesn't specify. Okay. I can think of one at least. I'm trying to think if there's
give me
one.
your guesses.
I'm gonna go with 2. I think we've seen 2.
Okay. Which are?
My guesser are. okay, it may not be like the source of, but where we've seen them used, I'm gonna guess are like little storm form spren that has turned the Parshendi, given them storm form.
Okay.
I'm also just gonna do the crazy guess of I forget what they're called, but our crazy guy at the end of Edge Dancer made up of all the little Kremlings.
The Sleepless.
The Sleepless, yeah. I'm just gonna guess that whoever is in charge of the Sleeplesses and
Mr. Kremlin guy is a
yeah,
unmade.
Mr. Kremling guy's
Mr.
boss
Kremlin
is
guy.
is definitely one of our shadows.
Okay.
Another little guess on this. I don't think adds up, but it's a thought on our dark sphere correlated to this. So all of our heralds and I almost said our Mistborn. All of our heralds and our
Knights
what's
Radiant.
yes, all of our Knights Radiant. Wow, all of our Knights Radiant use Stormlight, right? And I'm wondering if our Unmade here use like a corrupted version of Stormlight that we
Okay.
just haven't seen, but have been, they have them. And
now
Gavilar
that
somehow got some of it.
and now that the Everstorm is back, it can infuse it with it.
Perhaps that's a way to look at it. But there's some kind of like dark alternative to Stormlight that they may draw their power from.
Okay.
And maybe Gavilar found that out. Maybe he found the little key or the proof to that and stuff. Or yeah.
Just a couple misguiding clues for you.
Mm-hmm.
Is Nightblood one of our shadows? Is the Dark Sphere, whatever's in the Dark Sphere, one of our shadows? Is the Thrill one of our shadows?
The Thrill definitely isn't. Wait, maybe. The Thrill is actually the only one that I would give credit to.
Okay.
I don't think the Dark Sphere is. I think maybe it's a tool of one of them or something like that, but I don't think it itself is anything like that.
Elliot, you've been brewing over there for a while.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have. So to spill over what I've been brewing. So the Stormfather actually gives us a slight clue here. Dalinar is talking to him either in the vision or afterwards. I can't remember, but the Stormfather specifically says. Dalinar asks about the Nine Shadows, and the Stormfather says, Nine Shadows, the Unmade, his minions, ancient Spren. And so I'm taking from that these are Spren, perhaps a very different kind of Spren that we've typically seen before. But kind of running with that, I had not thought about the Thrill, but I could definitely see that being the case. We had some hints of Teravangian. Was it Teravangian? It is part of that whole Teravangian discussion of he was like hunting some spren that had an influence on people. So perhaps a Thrill is driven by one of these very powerful spren, perhaps one of the Unmade. I could also see one of the Unmade being the source of I believe it's been coined, death rattles that Teravangian is capturing. He hinted that there was some sort of a source for those that he was kind of like trying to track across Roshar, or there's certain areas where they get more of these deathbed sayings, and other areas where there's less. So that could be one of them. I do think your first hint was going to be what I was going to predict, Trevor. I think at this point, I think that orb, that sphere, has one of the Unmade trapped in it. I think that one of these shadows is what's in that orb, making it glow dark. I was originally thinking along the lines that you're talking, Paul, that this dark light may be like a opposite version of Stormlight. That was my original thought, but I think I'm going to change that. I think I'm going to amend that to, I don't think it's Stormlight or a version in that sphere. I think it's one of the Spren, one of these ancient Unmade Spren themselves in that sphere.
There's a couple other candidates. The Night Watcher could be one of our shadows.
Yeah.
that big spren that caused all the geyser in our interlude. I don't remember. Way back in the Way of Kings. I don't know if you guys remember what I'm talking about, but
Yeah, I do. We talked about it not too long ago. It's just kind of the like rethinking of how Sprint works with more knowledge we have today, I guess.
right.
Nah, that Spren is way too happy and just like splashing tourists. There's no way he's evil.
Yeah, true.
Alrighty. Any more thoughts on the prologue before we? And this is also chapter 1 with the Unmade that we're talking here. But any more thoughts before we get into the killing of Sadeas and the repercussions heading into Oathbringer here?
Just one really, and that was that again, just a little bit of a hint that I feel like we don't have nearly enough to unravel at this point. The Parshendi or Eshonai is talking about Zeth, and we learn a little bit more about how they acquire Zeth, how they bought him at like a slave market and then sent him in, figured out that he was an assassin and could go kill Gavilar for him, so they sent him in. But there's like a brief mention about the Parshendi who did this, who went and bought Zeth, did so at the prompting of a voice. And like that's all it's left at. And not capitalized, I would note too. Sometimes like really important things just get randomly capitalized. And so when I'm reading, I'm like, ooh, important. This one's not. So it's just like a voice.
A voice.
Yeah. What in the world is that?
It could be something supernatural. It could be Taravangian trying to throw wrenches in the Alethi plan. It could be anything.
I wrote that down. I wrote down Taravangian because that's what I thought of. It doesn't seem to fit his like abilities because it does seem like a supernatural thing, but this is totally something Taravangian would do. That very much behind the scenes manipulating, ooh, I'm going to get these Parshendi to think they need to buy Zeth so that they figure out that he's an assassin, and so they kill Gavilar. Like that's the kind of puppet mastery type of stuff that we've seen Taravangian is capable of. So I thought of that, but yeah, the voice, that's going to go on my list of questions because I bet it's not going to get answered for 4 books.
Thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, Brandon.
Thanks,
come
Brandon.
on.
That was it.
Touching on this this vision that Dalinar has in chapter 1. It's a vision he's seen before, but he's kind of manipulating it now. So his new bond with the Stormfather lets him have like fast forward, rewind, jump around, 360 like control vision of these visions now. He can apparently enter them when he wants and back up and stuff like that. So he jumps around and goes down into the broken ruins of Kholinar. Or maybe it's like an ancient Kholinar. And he says the wind blades, which I always envision Minas Tirith here. Of like this huge like blade of stone coming out of the rock. Like it's built around this these 4 wind blades coming out of the stone. And shout out to Capsule and his little music plate thing making stuff about anyway. And the wind blades themselves are cracked in half and like laying on the ground and like just have themselves destroyed the city. So Dalinar's kind of walking around and they have this dialogue about Odium, and I can't ever say Odium without like dropping my voice, like Odium, like
Odium.
It's such a good name, Odium.
Odium.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not the only. Michael Kramer does it too. When you listen to the audiobook, Paul, whenever Michael Kramer says Odium, you're just like Odium. You're like, oh. Anyway, so
it is very menacing.
What did you guys pick up on for the Stormfather and Dalinar having this dialogue back and forth?
I noted, or I wrote down thunderclasts. We've only seen these things briefly or kind of alluded to. They were perhaps in the prelude all the way at the very beginning of Way of Kings. There's one in one of the visions that Dalinar had. I think that's Way of Kings as well. But I think Dalinar's thinking that those types of beasts are what did this destruction to Kolinar. So I'm wondering if this is perhaps kind of foreshadowing an encounter we might see in this book. Are we actually going to see one of these things? Are chasm fiends going to become, no longer the massive creatures we think they are, and just the small version of the huge thunderclasts, which are the real big creatures that are just enormous and can destroy entire cities, whereas now we think chasm fiends are enormous and destructive. So perhaps that's coming.
So now's as good a time to bring it up as any. If you guys see the cover of Oathbringer, I'm not going to reveal who this is quite yet, although you could probably guess. We have our cover here, and then on the back, it's kind of hard to tell, but there's a battle scene, and then there's two like huge legs. Do you see that, Elliot?
Kind of.
There's one here, and there's one here, and like the whole upper shadow part is like this body. It's kind of hard to tell, but if you can get the cover art without the back script on it, then you can definitely tell it's there. But there's your allusion to Thunderclast there.
I also definitely see some red lightning up there as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I think we may perhaps have some epic battles in our future here. I think the other big thing I noted in Dalinar's vision was, and I kind of already mentioned this a minute earlier with my 2 words, was a moment when he sees Odium and Odium's champion. And I was trying to understand it. I couldn't quite tell. It seems like Odium is just kind of the light in the background, and Odium's champion is the dark figure standing in front. Am I interpreting that correctly? Can you even tell me if I'm interpreting that correctly?
I will nod my head.
Oh, okay. I'll take whatever I can get. And so he's looking at Odium's champion and Odium and the whole dark and the light and how interesting that is. I noticed, Dalinar says that the dark figure and like the intensity of his eyes, like his red glare, seems terrifyingly familiar. And maybe I'm focusing in a little too much on one word, but familiar. Is this going to turn out to be someone we know, like this champion? Is this going to be someone who like Dalinar knows already? I can't think of who that would be, but is this going to turn out to not be some, new god character who's a figure we haven't seen before, but instead someone we do know? That would be a twist.
It's Gavilar. He's alive.
Right? Yeah, I don't know.
I think I have it figured out. So the way that
is it Shallan? That's gonna be your theory.
It's Light Song.
Brandon Sanderson has to make this really interesting and really unforeseeable, right? So it's someone who doesn't know that they're the Odium's champion yet.
Okay.
It becomes Odium's champion, but Dalinar is seeing kind of into the future here. Maybe not someone who's like, oh, I've been it the whole time here to surprise you, but someone who becomes that, and that it's really sad, right?
Someone who
it's Adolin. That's my guess.
Oh.
It is Adolin because he killed Sadeas, and that's going to be my guess. He's going to go on some big trope where it's all downhill from here. Really sad, and he's not going to have the kind of like emotional perseverance like Kaladin does throughout all the hard times and stuff. He's going to give into it more, and he's going to become a bad guy. But he's also super, super powerful and strong because he's Adolin, and he's super good at dueling and all this stuff. So
now that is interesting.
That's 40% serious because I don't know if that could actually happen, but it's kind of fun to think about. So
That is why we're
So,
here. It's just how
throw
things
it.
fun to. You guys are just like throwing stuff at the whiteboard and whatever sticks. You're like, "Ha! I said that. I said
I
that.
called it."
Yeah, let's ignore everything else I said. I said that one."
Exactly. Yeah, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So
True.
we're just taking a ton of shots, and we'll see if any of them work out.
He's caught on to us, Paul.
Apparently.
Wonderful. All right. Let's talk about Sadeas. Sadeas is dead at the hands of Adolin. On one of the final chapters of Words of Radiance, and we talked about this briefly when we were talking about Words of Radiance. But as a first-time reader, I was incredibly unsatisfied with this Sadeas death. I thought it was very disappointing and a letdown for Adolin's character, and completely relatable. Like, you totally understand why Adolin is doing it, but after all this time, to have him fall in a dishonorable manner from Adolin, like a backstab in the back alley of Urithiru, and he doesn't get his duel that he's dreamed of for 1,000 pages or whatever since the betrayal. You're right, Paul. There is a downward trend for Adolin here, and then we get some of the repercussions here of Sadeas' death. What were you guys' thoughts as we jumped back into Urithiru drama?
Adolin's definitely feeling the guilt a little bit already. We get a little bit of Adolin perspective, and it's I think, Paul, you and I are guessing. I think we're on the right track at least a little bit, in that I think Adolin's going to be headed downhill. I think this is going to eat at him. I think this is going to be a major burden for him in his character going forward. He's going to have to deal with the fact that he, pulled a knife on Sadeas and took him down when he wasn't even prepared. And I agree with you, Trevor, that the Sadeas death is frustrating as a reader, because I wanted a satisfying Sadeas death.
Right.
You wanted somebody to stand up and take Sadeas down. Well, they did. They just did it in a kind of dirty way, and so now it's like, I wanted to like that you got Sadeas, but now I can't, because you just shanked him when he wasn't looking. I mean, I wasn't quite that, but yeah.
Yeah, it definitely was. I definitely didn't expect it until it happened. But yeah, and I'm assuming it was for a purpose, that it's going to cause a whole lot of greater implications, but I haven't thought about it too much, honestly. It wasn't perfect, but honestly, I'm kind of glad, because I think my only complaint, it definitely, Brandon Sanderson does a great job of like bringing things out that you don't expect. But for the most part, a lot of things happen as you would expect. Like, our good guys don't really die or anything like that, or our main characters at least. And this was definitely like a shocker. It wasn't like how a typical story would play out, so I'm happy for that reason. But so yeah. No big thoughts on it other than that, though.
Polona says what everybody else is thinking. Like, oh, phew, we don't have to worry about him anymore. Like, got him out of the way. I think the chapter's even titled "One Problem Solved," and everybody else is kind of thinking it, and then Polona's like, well, that's good. Next. And then Dalinar seems to be more troubled about it than anybody else, even though the betrayal is the most personal for Dalinar. Maybe Kaladin, but
yeah. I love the fact that Dalinar is honorable to a flaw. He's insistent that Sadeas' death is a bad thing, because he knows what Sadeas is capable, and he's sure that he could have brought Sadeas back over, or at least worked together with him to achieve something. And everyone else in the room is like, Dalinar, he stabbed you in the back multiple times. Get over it, man. It's good that he's gone. And honestly, I probably myself am on the side of, it's good that he's gone. I'm not a huge fan of the way he was taken out, but I think it is better that he's gone. But no, Dalinar is going to stick to his guns. He's going to stick to that. He was my enemy. He betrayed me, but I still could have repaired that or brought good out of that. Like, wow, that's a really honorable stance to take.
Yeah. And Dalinar certainly sees this other side of it, where the Dalinar versus Sadeas conflict is by no means over. In fact, this might have just escalated it as opposed to diffused it, because now all of Sadeas' men are like, yo, why'd you kill our High Prince? Like, yeah, that's really convenient that the men in Bridge 4 found him alone in the alleyway, and they could have easily just killed him right there and then found the body a couple hours later or whatever. So all of Sadeas' men are, and they're not wrong. Like, Adolin is the one who killed him, so Sadeas' princedom is probably even less loyal to Dalinar than they would have been otherwise, because Sadeas has certainly been backstabbing Dalinar, but there's at least a twisted reason behind what Sadeas' motives were, and that Dalinar could have tried to work with. Now there's just emotion. There's no thought on the head of Sadeas' house right now. There's just a bunch of angry officers in his battalion now. So they're gonna have that to deal with going forward. All of this in the midst of Dalinar trying to unite. So Dalinar is a bondsmith, and we don't know a lot about what that means. We've gotten a little bit towards the end of Words of Radiance, a little bit in chapter 1 here, but Dalinar is getting compared to the Sunmaker, who was a tyrant, as some people would say, back in the day, of trying to unite as much as Roshar. Think of like Alexander the Great, just marches in one direction, killing everybody that he can find just to make his empire as big as possible. That was the Sunmaker, one of Dalinar's not descendants, the other way, ancestors. Thank you. And so, yeah, Dalinar is trying to unite the entire continent, as he's been quested to do, either by the Stormfather or the Almighty, or both. I don't know. So Adolin's dividing the Alethi with this assassination of Sadeas, and while Dalinar is trying to unite not only the Alethi, not only the 10 High Princes, but literally everybody, every human he can find against Odium, against the Parshendi, the Voidbringers.
And I think it's going to come. I think exactly that may end up being one of our major conflicts later down the line, of if Dalinar figures out that it was Adolin that killed Sadeas and created this dissection, or this split instead of this union that he's trying so hard to make. Could that be what breaks, and pits Dalinar versus Adolin kind of thing? Is that going to be a moment where they can't reconcile that, and all of a sudden now Adolin and Dalinar are not happy with each other, or perhaps not on the same sides anymore? I could see that. I hope not.
Yeah.
I'm curious too about the Sunmaker. We've heard a couple references before to the Sunmaker, but I'm wondering if this is going to be something we revisit a little bit in this book, is comparing Dalinar to this leader who came long before him, and how they go about creating this unison of peoples. Dalinar's trying to do it in a peaceful manner. He's trying to unite everyone under a common cause, where I did pick up on the hints too, Trevor, that it sounds like the Sunmaker was a little more of a dictator or a warlord, who more kind of Gavilar style marched in with his army and said, "You're going to be my allies. I'm going to kill your people off until you agree to be my allies," kind of thing.
Yeah.
So we'll see how Dalinar's method works for him.
I do have to say, just in general, so our first two books were Kaladin's and Shallan's, and I feel like Kaladin's was the most. This is kind of a more macro scale here. Kaladin's was more like entry level interesting, right? His story was kind of exciting. And there's a lot of like action and things going on. And Shallan's was also really great, but we kind of needed a little more development, I guess, for it to really pay off. Like Shallan in the first book, kind of boring. So, and I will say that the fact that this is Dalinar's book hasn't had me very excited. Because I feel like Dalinar hasn't been that exciting of a character. But as we've seen more of him throughout the books, we know that there's like a ton of stuff that is tied up with him, and so I actually do have like high hopes for this. Obviously, like I was excited for this book, but I'm curious to see what all is going to happen with Dalinar's character overall, and kind of this whole unite them. I guess out of our, if he would be considered our third main character here, I feel like that's still like the least exciting at the moment. But I do have a lot of faith that obviously it's later in the book series, and we have had a lot of stuff happen, and so I feel confident that that's going to turn into something extremely like exciting, and we're going to see some cool stuff with it. But especially because I've heard your opinion a lot, Trevor, but I haven't heard from everyone, but I do get the general consensus that Oathbringer is kind of viewed as the best one of the series. At least most people's favorite. I could be way off, but just in general, I'm curious to see how he unites them, or if that falls through, or what really happens there. And kind of Dalinar's perspective. I'm really curious about Dalinar flashback chapters, actually. That's usually ends up being my favorite with all of our storylines so far.
So, as far as highest rated, as a common general reader of the Stormlight Archive, Words of Radiance is usually first, for highest, like most enjoyed, and then The Way of Kings, and then Oathbringer probably, and then Rhythm of War, in that order. So almost chronological, but not quite. I'm in a fair minority of putting Oathbringer first. A lot of people critique Oathbringer for a couple reasons, but I won't spoil that for you. So,
yeah, I don't mind. Go ahead. Yeah, like you don't
for this and this and this and this.
I see what you mean. Yeah, and that's curious. I didn't actually know. I just always heard you, and you're like, "Oh, Oathbringer's the best thing ever." So
it is.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
I'm excited to actually really to get all the way through this book and be able to form our own opinions, Paul. And because I agree, I've heard very different things from different people. I've had people say, "Oh, Oathbringer, it's the best one. You're going to love it." And then other people say, "Oh, Oathbringer, yeah, I made it through that one in order to get to Rhythm of War." So I really want to read and see what I think of it.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and place it now. It is, out of the 3 ones we've read so far, I'd put it like 5th. So,
okay.
We'll see. Yeah.
2 chapters in, and you're already set.
Yeah, not much has happened. It's not that great. Like, we've barely seen anything. So far, it's not that good.
Couple loose ends to tie up in this episode. Lopen has his arm back. We get a couple drops about Squires and Windrunners, and we kind of getting the context of what all this means. What were you guys' reactions to Lopen having his arm back? Isn't it just like an off comment of Dalinar, like,
yes,
oh, he has his arm back, moving on?
I was like, I was like full, like, hold on, wait a second. We knew it was healing, but boom, it's back. You're like, whoa, he's okay. Wow. We knew Stormlight healing was powerful, but that's to grow an entire arm back in, I guess we don't really have a great understanding of the time frame here, a week.
It's a week.
I mean,
yeah.
the Everstorm hasn't even come back yet, right? So it's like a week. Like, man, wow. I did think it was cool, the reference to, and this again feels like a big moment, a very important detail that's just kind of, oh yeah, and by the way, the Bridge 4 guys have all started glowing and they appear to have some of powers. And oh yeah, how's the weather, Navani? Like, wait, hang on a second.
Yeah.
Like, this thing that they all wanted so badly, they're all like training with Kaladin and helping him develop his powers. And they're like, oh yeah, one day I'll be able to do this. And we all thought, oh, they're just, jealous of his powers. They'll never get it. And then boom, right here in the first chapter, second chapter of Oathbringer, and they have it. They have some of Kaladin's Windrunner powers. Like, whoa, I feel like that's really important.
True. I'm curious to know your thoughts about this, Elliot. I thought it was really cool, but also it almost felt. I can't say it felt like forced or like a little too cheesy, but almost. I wouldn't say that it was cheesy, but like I feel like someone could think that, like, just kind of playing onto the concept of like, oh, all of our protagonists are like immune, like they can't die, and stuff. But it is really neat. I felt like it was kind of like it seems like such a big deal, and I feel like it was just kind of dropped on there, like, oh, by the way, some people can be Night Radiant Squires and have some of the powers, and kind of just moved on from there.
I'm gonna jump in real quick here. I completely agree. When I first read Oathbringer and I read this for the first time, I thought it was really, and I mean, you're 2,000 pages into this, or even more than that. I thought it was really cheap. Of like, Kaladin worked so hard, and he didn't work for these powers. They were like a byproduct of his good character and stuff. And then all of his friends just kind of get it for free because they're with him and they're squires to him. I thought it was like, I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of disappointed when I heard that as a concept of squires and sharing your powers, that type of thing.
Now that you say that, what would have been awesome would be a Lopen novella in between these two books to like explain that, to like follow Lopen as he's growing back his arm and like discovering that they have powers, and like the Bridge, kind of bring in more of the learn more about some of the Bridge 4 characters without Kaladin. Like he's left, but they're all figuring out that they have powers. That would have been a very interesting novella to kind of develop exactly what you're talking about.
Side note, Brandon Sanderson has mentioned that at some point he's going to go back and do a novella between Way of Kings and Words of Radiance. And it's going to be Rock's novella.
Ooh.
So there's a tidbit for you there. We have no idea when that's coming. He's just like, yeah, I'll get around to it sometime. So
that's pretty cool. I do agree with what you were saying, Trevor. Like I'm glad you brought that up, or like brought that up. I'm glad that you like said that. Yeah, it did feel a little cheap. I was kind of almost hoping. So I guess what disappointed me most specifically also was we see Lopen like taking Stormlight at the very end of Words of Radiance, and it's kind of like the, oh my gosh, what like order is Lopen gonna be? And then that's kind of like a, oh, like he's just a squire or whatever. And I think it would have still even been cool if Bridge 4 members just became Knights Radiant, and there was more orders in play or things like that. But yeah, I feel like the squire thing is like a little awkward or forced or something.
Yeah.
It is cool. I'm hoping that it plays out well in practice, but just the concept of it, I was like, okay. So people aren't as, I don't know. It's like they're more special, but also I feel like by the end of this, we're gonna see a whole bunch of these squires, and everyone's friends are gonna be pseudo search finding.
I think it's a tool to try to tell you that Surge Binding wasn't as rare back in the day, like of the Knights Radiant, where you could take on a Squire and they wouldn't necessarily have to have a spren to Surge Bind. Surge Binding was way more commonplace than what we're seeing with this. So once they pick up their Surge Binding, that more people can do it. But anyway,
and just from like a world building and storytelling methods, it's actually a fairly good way to raise the stakes, because as we get further and further into this, he's gonna likely be kind of upping the stakes with the bad guys. We're gonna be facing tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher, and we've mentioned already kind of bigger and bigger evils. Well, in order to realistically combat that, we need our good guys to kind of be leveling up as well, right? And so for a lot of people to now have these powers in order to combat the much greater evil we're going to encounter, that just kind of makes sense. That all the stakes are just getting raised like across the board.
That is a really good point, and it will kind of put into perspective like a difference of strength in the opponents that we may see down the line. So that is really cool.
Any closing thoughts on episode 56? First couple chapters of Oathbringer.
I want more Zeth and Nightblood.
We did get... We got a full novella with cameos of Zeth and Nightblood, and I understand the desire there since we just spent a whole month and a half on Warbreaker, so it's coming, don't worry.
I'm excited for Zeth. I'm excited for everything. I'm just excited to be back into these books. I forgot how excited I got reading these chapters and wanting to know more and finding little nuggets of stuff that's like, oh, but what could that mean, and all this stuff there. There was some of that in the other books that we've been reading kind of in our little break from Stormlight Archives, but getting back into it, it's like, oh yeah, I love this stuff.
Cool. Well,
definitely.
We can close it for now and reconvene next week for chapters 3 through 7 is going to be next week. So we can close it here and talk next week. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Eliot.
Of course.